Before sunrise, Winterfell lay under a thin skin of frost that turned every stone into a quiet star. The water in the Godswood pool breathed a thin fog into the air. It seemed to rise from the black surface and wrap the weirwood's smooth bark in a faint, milky veil. Branches were still. The ravens dozed. In that hour, the castle did not yet belong to the day or the night. It was the space between, a held breath before speech, a heartbeat waiting to choose its rhythm. A boy moved through the trees, his breath white, his hair damp with dew. He marked a circle in the grass with the toe of his boot before he bowed to the weirwood. The bough was small, almost hidden under the drape of his plain cloak, but he took care with its shape. From the brush stepped a man who wore a sword and the gray of the north without sigil or finery. His hair had gone silver early, and he kept it unadorned. He moved like someone who never wasted a step. "You remembered the circle," the man said. Jon nodded. "You told me the sky remembers its own boundaries." "The sky has none," the man said, mouth quirking. "But a man must draw his own. We begin here every morning to remind ourselves where we end and the blade begins." His voice had the faintest Southron music to it, sanded down by years in the north and caution. The Godswood had learned him, and he it. Jon took up the wooden practice blade. The grain was worn to satin. His own hands had polished it darker at the grip. The man, who wore the name Sir Arlen in the north and bore another in his marrow, stood across the circle with his back to the weirwood and lifted his own waster in a soft, almost courtly raise. "Dawn's style," Sir Arlen said, "begins before the cut. Attend to your feet, Jon." Jon drew a breath and felt for the pressure in the balls of his feet. He lifted his heel the smallest fraction to keep the ankles soft, and set his weight as he had been shown. Slightly forward, never locked. A suspension ready to move. "White horizon," the knight said. Jon stepped into the opening form. A long, patient guard with the blade's line angled like the first light across seawater. He could feel his shoulder wanting to tighten. He let it go the way one lets go of the last taste of a dream. Sir Arlen paced lightly along the circle's edge, each footfall placed where it left the least noise. He did not test Jon at once. He watched, and the watching was itself a testing. "Seam of morning," he said, and Jon slid the point a hand's breadth, allowed the guard to flow like silk tugged by a wind. Then, calling the comet, Jon shifted the weight to his left foot and brought the blade in a quick diagonal arc that was not meant to strike, but to break the eye's hold. In that flash he stepped off the line, drew a second breath into his ribs, and let it out slowly through his teeth. The wasters met with a soft, wooden talk. Jon's wrist trembled, then steadied. The knight pressed, not with force but with questions. Little taps that asked, "What is your balance? Where will your foot go next? Will you chase my blade, boy?" Jon kept his eyes not on the wood but just above it, where he had been taught to live with the hint of movement, the memory of an arc. Steel would be brighter than wood and sing different notes, but the song's skeleton was the same. "Again," Sir Arlen said, and they began to move. The circle was the morning's sea. Jon's blade was a gull's wing carving air. He learned to let the motion pass through him, instead of trying to catch it with his hands. The knight's blade was a pale ghost, always arriving a breath before Jon expected, always leaving a breath before Jon could chase it. The first time Jon met that ghost with his full strength, he felt it vanish under his weight. And suddenly the old man, he was not old, not to the measure of years, but to the measure of years, but to the measure of wars, was somewhere else inside the circle, where Jon's eyes had not prepared to find him. "You fight your fear of looking foolish," Sir Arlen said softly, tip of his waster touching Jon's sleeve. "Better fear the stiffness that follows pride. Loosen your neck. Keep the head free." Jon breathed, notching that counsel into the ledger he kept within himself. He could name each of the tiny places where stiffness lived. He had made a habit of hunting those places. Again, they moved until the frost at the circle's rim broke, and the ground grew damp beneath Jon's boot soles. The ravens woke, took turns announcing the day. When they stopped, Jon knelt and set the waster across his thighs. He didn't speak for a time. Speaking too quickly after this practice put a clumsy weight back into his tongue. Sir Arlan leaned the wooden blade against the weirwood's roots and, as was his custom, placed his hand flat on the bark. He was not a man of the old gods, but he offered them the quiet of his breath, and the godswood took it with its usual patience. "You favored the right foot in your last turning," Sir Arlan said at last. "You were remembering a slip yesterday on the pale stair near the smithy. Fear tilts the body." "Bah." John flushed, surprised to be so seen. "I thought to hide it." "Do not tangle yourself in the thought of hiding. Just stand straight again. Even dawn casts a shadow, Jon Snow. The sword does not cease to be itself because the world is imperfect beneath it." Dawn. Jon felt the familiar tug in his chest. The name lived there with a story's heat. Sir Arlan nodded, and a crinkle of some memory touched the thin lines at his eyes. "They say she was forged from the heart of a fallen star. It is a pretty tale. She is pale, yes, and her sound is not like other steel. But what matters is this: the blade knows what the hand intends. Think of that when you grip even this poor wooden thing." "Mend." Jon rose, rolling his shoulders to keep them supple, and took up the waster again. He felt the knuckles and the slight click in his smallest finger, where he had jammed it last autumn joining the stable boy's game of knucklebones. He breathed into it, to let it be part of the grip's truth rather than an insult to be ignored. "Again," he said. Sir Arlan's approval was a small thing, and all the larger for it. He did not show warmth in the ways other men did. He never raised his voice. It was in the precision of his correction, in the way he adjusted the angle of Jon's blade by 2 degrees, and afterward watched Jon to see what he would do with this new horizon. They were still moving inside the circle, when the distant clatter of the yard came creeping through the trees. The awakening of hooves and wheels, the hammer beginning its day on iron, Theon Greyjoy's laughter sparking across stone like flint. Jon felt the castle take its first full breath. He turned that awareness into the smallest adjustment of his stance. It was part of him now to listen backward and sideways while focusing forward. When the practice ended, Sir Arlan offered him an apple. It was cold from being kept in the cellars, and the first bite filled Jon's mouth with sweet wetness. They ate without speech. A red leaf slipped loose and sailed down to rest against the waster. Jon watched the way the leaf tipped and spiraled in a draft he could not see. "May I ask a thing?" Jon said. "You know that you may ask 3. The cost is that you must listen for the answers." Jon smiled in spite of himself. "There is a form we have not done yet, the one you call breaking the line. When will you teach it?" "When you find it," Sir Arlan said. "Forms are maps men draw to keep from being lost, but there are moments in every fight where the world is not on the map, and you must draw while moving. The form you call breaking the line is not a cut. It is a moment when the man before you ceases to be so many possibilities and becomes a single one. You do not so much break his line as agree to be the one who names it. Do you understand that?" Jon stared at the leaf. "I think so. Not yet. Now." "Good," Sir Arlan said with the rare, warm weight of the word. "The day you think you understand, test yourself doubly." They left the godswood by the narrow path beside the ancient wall and crossed the bridge. Winterfell's stones took the dawn's cold and held it. Jon loved the feeling even when it stung his hands. The great hall would be awake now, with Catelyn at her seat, and Robb loud with morning joy, and Bran clambering at anything worth climbing, and Arya threading her way where she pleased and calling it accident. Jon knew the little passageways by heart, and slipped down the one that took him to an antechamber where he could wash without stepping straight into the great hall's sight. Sir Arlan did not go to the hall. He never did. He ate when he ate, in one of those unremarked corners. A castle grows to hide souls like his. This was by design, and Ned Stark's will. The Lord had given his quiet night the unmarked place a secret deserves. Sir Arlan was a useful man when no one thought to weigh his usefulness. He had arrived with the smell of desert heat still in his clothes, though that was years ago now, and brought with him a silence that the North read as winter's own. The men of the yard called him an old swordsman from no house worth naming, and he let them. In the hall, the heat of the hearth pushed back at Jon's face. Catelyn Stark's features softened in the firelight. When she saw him, She did not smile or scowl. She nodded in the manner she used, when at once acknowledging and keeping distance. It landed in John's chest like a careful stone, precisely placed, neither comfort nor cruelty, a mark drawn neat to remind him where he ended. Rob clapped him on the back hard enough to make him stumble a pace. "Gods, you're always damp in the mornings," Rob said. "A man must pour the dew out of him somewhere," John said, and Rob laughed. "Quick, open." Theon lounged at the end of the bench as if it had been made for his spine alone. His smile was a hook. He loved to fish for reactions. "Our bastard broods at the dawn as if the gods will write him a father on the mist." "Someone wrote you into this hall," John said mildly. "Things stranger than fathers happen at Winterfell." Rob snorted beer through his nose, which earned him a long-suffering look from Mother, and a scolding from the septa that rolled off him like rain off a duck's back. Bran, sticky with honey from his porridge, piped, "I saw a hare in the snow by the eastern wall. It went hop hop hop, right under Sir Roderick's beard." "And see." "It must have been seeking a place warm and whiskered," Arya said, which made Sansa sigh in a way only older sisters master. Ned Stark arrived late, carrying frost with him, as if he did not notice its weight. He kissed Catelyn's brow and set his hand on Rob's shoulder and ruffled Arya's hair. All of these gestures were true, and if he did not touch Jon's head, that was true also. He met Jon's eyes and nodded once, very slightly. That nod mattered more to Jon than warmth he did not expect. After the meal, the yard hammer took over the day's voice. Sir Roderick Castle barked orders at the guard and levied gentle threats against the lazy-wristed. Jon did the work of a boy in a castle. He fetched, he carried, he ran messages from the steward to the cellars and from the armory to the towers. He did them attentively. Sir Arlen had made it a condition of his teaching that Jon's hands earn their right to climb the hilt by serving the stone and the grain and the coal. "A man with soft tasks grows soft places he does not notice," he had said. "Keep your hands familiar with weight that is not a sword." In the afternoon, the day warmed enough for the frost to let go of the topmost stones. Rob and Jon sparred under Sir Roderick's eye, while Theon jeered this and that, and then took his own turn. Blade ringing like a bell, whose sound was slightly too pleased with itself. Jon's style was unadorned when other eyes were on him. He gave Roderick what the master expected. Solid guard Northman's cuts, no Southron flourishes to alarm a teacher who had earned the right to be conservative. Yet even here, a small difference lived in his feet. He slid rather than stomped. He left and returned to the line in a way that made Roderick's eyebrows climb once, and then never again, as the master decided that what he had seen was, after all, simply good balance and not a heresy. That evening, Jon took Ghost from the box of hay he had loosened for the birch pale pup near the hearth in the old kennels. Ghost put his cold nose into the hinge of Jon's elbow and made the soft sound only Jon heard. The direwolf's red eyes were the sort that made men squint, as if they were looking into a place on the horizon where weather changes lived. To Jon they were home. He had found the pup on the day Bran had found the litter, and Rob had claimed the largest gray in Sansa, the pretty one, and Arya the one that bit Bran's thumb, and Theon had smirked a smirk. The runt, near dead, had lain apart from the rest, a white smudge in the trampled snow. Jon had taken him up without asking anyone's permission. Something in that small weight had spoken to him. Not in words, not in any magic he could name. The feeling had been akin to being offered a blade whose balance fit his hand in the first instant, as if it had always been waiting to sit there. Ghost and Jon walked the castle's shadows together at night. The pup padded silent, even when he grew into his long legs and the heavy paws that promised strength. Jon learned to step in time with him. Sir Arlen had noticed, and once, just once, said, "Pay attention to the way his weight answers a sound. That is a language you must speak too." Then one. On a night when the wind picked at the banners and the moon made the snow look like bone, Jon found himself drawn. He would not have said by what, because any answer would have felt like naming a guest who had not asked to be announced. To the crypt's entrance. He lit a torch and descended. Ghost's eyes cut the dark like flint strikes. The stone air was thick and smelled of old earth, iron, faint oil. He did not go far. He knew better than to lose count of his steps. He sat on a low shelf, where no lord lay, and let the torch sound fill the space. Flame has a sound if you listen properly. He thought of the circle in the God's Wood, and how easily one could become lost inside it and not know it, except for the feel of breath changing shape in one's chest. Footsteps came to him through stone, careful, measured. John rose, brought the torch around, and found Lord Eddard Stark standing with a wax seal in one hand, and a blank face he could not read, except as a man reads winter cloud. "Father," John said. "John." Ned's voice was, as always, the sound of a door that fit its frame, neither stuck nor loose. It had the weight of habit, and the hint of 1,000 judgments weighed and kept. He indicated the torch. "You have fire. Walk with me a space." They went deeper by a small measure, enough that the names on the stone altered, and the air cooled. Ned halted before a lord who had worn a snow-matted beard in his stone sleep for longer than any living could remember. He rubbed his thumb across the stone's brow, a gesture half apology, half defiance against dust. "Winterfell keeps its secrets better than most," Ned said, not looking at John. "That does not mean forever." "I know," John said. Ned turned, and the torchlight cut his eyes into a color that had no name. "Do you? You know you are a bastard, and this hall has given you as much warmth as is seemly and perhaps more. You know that there are places you must not stand. Do you know that a promise once made is a road on which a man walks until his feet bleed?" John held his gaze. "I know you are a man who keeps promises." It put a small, bitter twist at one corner of Ned's mouth. "That is not always a good thing." Ghost settled against John's shin. The torch gave a little pop, threw a brighter tongue at the vaulting roots of stone above. "I tell you this," Ned said. "There are men who watch you for reasons that are not yours. And there is a man who teaches you for reasons not entirely yours either. Both things are my doing." John waited. "I trust him," Ned said, and a muscle in his cheek worked. "That does not mean I forgive him. Nor he me. We are not men for forgiving. But he will make of you something that will not break when it matters. And for that, I will let a sword drink my name from my veins, if I must. Do you understand this much?" "No." "I do," John said, though he did not fully. He understood trust, and he understood being used. He understood that men carried pits inside themselves that looked like wells until you tried to draw water from them. Ned's hand came up then, surprising them both perhaps. He placed it on John's hair and left it there a heartbeat. "You are a good boy," he said. "You will be a better man than I deserve to know." A rustle of air stirred, as if the crypts themselves exhaled. They went back the way they had come. After, standing in the corridor's draft, John watched Ned go to some duty, and felt the weight of the touch still warm on his head. Ghost leaned into his knee. John knelt and put his brow to the wolf skull, and let the animal's breathing teach him the measure of this hour. It became a winter of rituals. Dawn's style in the God's Wood, until the circle lost its frost, and found it again, and again. The forms came alive in his body, no longer trick steps to memorize, but a grammar that let him speak with his blade in sentences. White horizon became the sentence's patient opening, calling the comet its small exclamation, the swallowing night a parenthesis you only saw when already you had entered it. Sir Arlan showed him the art of the slip that does not look like a slip. He set him to spar against the old knight's offhand, then against both the old knight's hands together, in a way that made John's eyes water for concentration. "I will not train your strength against mine," said Sir Arlan. "I will train your sight against the story your body tells itself." In that winter, John learned the little things and lived in them. The way a blade speaks to a sheath if you listen as you draw it. The way the wind at the back of your neck tells you more of a man charging than the sound of his boots, when your ears are full of your own blood. The way every living thing enters a space. A bird enters at wing height, the air making room for its hollow bones. Theon enters with his mouth. Robb enters with his entire heart, grinning and careless and brave. Sir Arlan enters as if he had always been there, and you had been the one away. Once in late winter, when the snow had crusted into a brittle shell that made walking a hazard and playing a delight, Arya found them at the edge of the God's Wood when practice was done. She looked like a small soldier herself. Cheeks raw from cold. Hair a wild flag. She scratched Ghost under the chin, and Ghost suffered it with his usual grave dignity. "I want to learn," Arya said, chin lifting as if she had declared a war. "Sir Roderick teaches the girls dancing," Jon said carefully. Arya made a noise with her mouth that managed to be laughter and disgust in one. "I want to learn what you do, with the steps and the not breathing." "Breathing," Ser Arlan corrected, not unkind. "Always breathing. It only looks like not breathing when done properly." She stared at him as if he had emerged from the bark and might disappear back into it. "Please?" Ser Arlan's eyes, which were the color of cloud shadows on a river, rested on her face. "You are too young." "I'm not," she said. "I'm precisely my age and I don't intend to stay this size forever. Please." "Now." He was silent, and Jon knew this silence well. It was the space he made for a choice to ripen without heat. "Show me how you stand when you mean to say no to someone you love," Ser Arlan said at last. Arya blinked. Then she set her feet. She did it as she did most things, with too much heart and not enough habit. Her weight pressed down through her heels. Ser Arlan stepped forward, slowly, deliberately, and with 2 fingers on her shoulder he pushed her. She fell, more shock than hurt in the yelp she made. "Again," he said. She scowled up at him, a trembling shame in her lips' edge that would have broken any easier man. She got up. She set her feet again. He pushed. She swayed but did not fall. He nodded. "Whatever else we learn, we begin with this. You are full of wind and you want to be lightning. Lightning burns. Wind endures. Come when the sun is this high." He showed her with his hand a slice in the sky. 3 days a week, and you will tell no one. "I can tell Jon," she said. "You can tell Jon anything," Ser Arlan said, and there was some grief in it Jon could not place. "But keep it from the eyes that would laugh at you. Laughing is a kind of blade." Arya came. Ser Arlan did not teach her what he taught Jon. He taught her the bones beneath it. He taught her the small steps men never notice because they never bother to look down. He taught her to balance a cup on her head while walking the broken wall behind the old granary. He taught her to stand so that the world could push and find her ready to bend without losing her own measure. Jon watched his sister. She was his sister in every way that mattered, find within herself a place where no one else shape lived. He loved her then in the way the north loves a sudden spring, tender and a little frightened of it. Spring came for real when the ice on the pool cracked, and the fish could be seen flashing like coins in a lord's hand. The birds returned from wherever birds go when they tire of winter's conversation. The hammer's sound in the yard changed its pitch, as if even iron had moods. One afternoon, Ser Roderick set a wooden tourney in the yard for the younger boys. It was nothing formal. He set pairs with blunted steel and laughed when Benjen came out to mock, and then found himself pressed into judging. Theon preened and preened some more, then made a show of beating a boy a year younger than himself with such drama that even the stable cats looked embarrassed for him. Robb and Jon did not face each other until last. When they did, the yard went a little quieter. They had sparred for thousands of breaths. They had bled minor blood learning each other's tells and learned to hide them. Yet something had changed this spring. Robb fought like a young river, swift and full, with undercurrents that could drag an unwary foot out from beneath. Jon had learned to step in water without angering it. They circled. Ser Roderick called something about guard, that both ignored for reasons of love. They were already in a place old men's advice cannot enter. Robb came in high as he liked to do, trusting the strength in his arm and the enthusiasm in his heart. Jon showed him the promise of meeting it, then withdrew the promise just enough that Robb's blade had to reach. Not a trick, not something to shame a brother with, but a conversation between 2 boys who knew each other's voices too well. The blades touched, parted, touched again. Breath came loud. Theon whooped until someone shushed him. Arya stood on a crate to see better and fell off it and did not notice she had bruised her shin. Jon saw it then, The thing Sir Arlen had described and said could not be taught. The moment when Rob, his love of the fight and of John and of the day all bundled up in him, became a single line instead of many possibilities. John did not decide to break it. He stepped into the space it made by being itself. His blade slid, the way dawn light slides under a door's edge. He tapped Rob's guard out of true in a way that looked like kindness, and was only correctness. He set his point, gentle, against Rob's shoulder. The yard went still enough that he could hear the sound of a man spitting in the dust behind the smithy. Rob stared, then grinned a grin so wide it made his eyes nearly vanish. He seized John by the neck and laughed breathlessly into his face. "You sly ghost," he said. "When did you learn that?" "When I stopped trying," John said. And it was true in a way he did not yet know how to explain. Sir Roderick's hand clapped his back, then Rob's, spreading pain equally. Theon swaggered over and made a remark about how it had all been luck, and how a Greyjoy would have ended it with flair. Rob told him to put his flare where the sun never showed its face, and the laughter released the yard from its brief silence. Arya's eyes were bright as coins. "Show me that," she demanded later in a whisper only John heard. "Show me the moment where people become one thing." "It is harder to show than to see," John said. "Then let me see," she said, and John loved her for never wanting anything less. Sometimes, late, Sir Arlen would speak to the past. It might be only a sentence, uncaught by any net, unless a boy was paying attention with all his heart. "A man once told me there are no small promises," he said one night, while they cleaned the practice blades with oil that smelled faintly of pepper. He was right, but he forgot there are men too small to carry the weight they mean to keep. It is not enough to mean well. And oh. At other times he said nothing, and John learned to let that too be its own instruction. He learned the space of other men's sorrow and how to leave room around it. The only tale Sir Arlen told often enough for John to know some of it by heart was the tale of a sword that was not his now, and a line of dawns that had been. He never said the word Dayne. He never said Starfall. He spoke of a river that was clear as glass where it ran shallows over white stone, and of a keep that kept its shadows cool in summer. He spoke of a sister with a laugh like a bell hung in a high place, and the kind of pride that made a man both taller and lonelier, depending on the hour. Ghost grew. Joan's hands grew into a man's hands. He learned to shave with care, because the first time he did it hurriedly, Sir Arlen rapped him lightly on the ear and told him that a man who rushes at his own throat deserves whatever story the blade chooses to tell there. John laughed at himself, and then did not make the same error twice. He cut his nails short. He combed his hair back from his eyes. He discovered, without looking for it, that he moved through the castle without startling people, and that the only times he wished to startle them were the times he should most not. News came on wind as it always does. A raven's wing, a rider's breath, the chattering gossip of merchants who had heard a rumor 3 keeps ago, and now believed it as if it had happened in their own beds. The king had gone hunting. The king had fallen from his horse and cursed the saddle. The king had fathered another bastard and made a joke of it in a town that the joke did not belong to. John listened and kept his face straight. He did not think of kings as people for a long while, then caught himself and began to try to imagine what sort of man a king was when he woke with a sore knee or a dry mouth. One evening, Ned Stark sent for Sir Arlen. He sent the message through John, as was often the way. John found Sir Arlen in the old armory, polishing a blade that belonged to no house. The knight's hands did the work with a care that bordered on tenderness. He looked up when John spoke his name. Those gray eyes had a light in them that was not always there. "Lord Stark," Sir Arlen said, with that quiet respect he held like a coin in his palm. "Very well, tell him I am coming." "Does he call you often?" John asked as they walked the corridor together. He kept his tone idle. He was not idle. "Often enough," Sir Arlen said. "A lord keeps counsel in layers. I am a layer best not seen, unless the day requires it." "Does it?" "Today, I think it does." They went by a side stair, through a little door most men forgot existed, and into the solar where Ned kept his maps. A fire burned low, and the Lord stood with his knuckles on the table as if it steadied him. He looked up when they entered, and John saw something like winter flare and settle in his face. He sent John away with a nod so slight it might have been a trick of the firelight. John closed the door. He stood in the blue light of the corridor and laid his ear against the wood as if he were a boy of 5. Ghost looked at him and did not judge him for it. He heard almost nothing beyond the fire's rattle and the murmur of men who had learned long ago not to raise their voices near thin shutters. He caught one word. He could not swear how. Robert. It could have been any Robert, but in a castle like this, there was only one name that took all the air from the room when spoken. He felt the stone under his boots cooler than before. Sir Arlan came out at last. His face was the face of a man whose mask is indistinguishable from his skin. Only his hand told on him, just at the knuckle where the thumb meets the palm. It opened and shut once, as if an old wound had remembered itself. He did not speak until they were down the stair and inside the comfort of the armory's dust. "The king is coming," he said. John had known it already, in the bone. Still, to hear it said was like the moment a blade finally leaves the sheath and the note it makes tells you if you have kept it honest. When he is ready to arrive," Sir Arlan said dryly. "There are miles yet. There are days. The ravens have flown ahead of his horses. This keep has work." John nodded. He wondered what was expected of a bastard when a king crossed the bridge. He wondered if anyone expected anything of him at all. He wondered if he could be content with that. When the king came, he did not arrive as quietly as dawn. He arrived like a river in flood. Banners, laughter, the jingle of harness, the grunt of men who had ridden too far and would ride farther because a crown directed them. John watched from the shadow of a tower. He did not hide. He simply stood where he could see without being seen. Ghost's head just brushed John's hand where it hung at his side, and the rhythm of the animal's breath helped hold John still. Robert Baratheon had been a story to John. Now the story wore flesh. He was larger than even the tales made him, a man whose beard had its own weather. He dismounted with a sound that told of joints and indulgence. He laughed before he had quite found his feet, as if his own body's complaints amused him. Ned Stark went to him and both men were, for a moment, boys again, flinging themselves into the past with a roar. Catelyn knelt as became a lady, and rose with grace that would never be mistaken for warmth. Children were presented, daughters admired, sons measured, wardens greeted. Theon smirked and bowed and tried to make his smirk look like charm. Robb's hand held steady on the hilt of his good blade. Arya bowed with her hair in her eyes and thought herself a cat, and was, perhaps, some better thing yet. Bran watched with his mouth open, already thinking of the bannermen's cloaks as banners for stories he would tell himself at night to lull himself toward sleep. John did not go forward. He had learned too many mornings not to chase the image of a thing. He watched. He saw the queen's eyes slide over Ned's hall like cold poured into a mold. He saw the golden boy beside her look at his reflection in a polished shield. He saw the small knight with the clever hand in the little man's face count the people without seeming to look. He saw a Kingsguard with a face like graven steel sit his horse as if the saddle had grown from him. That one made Sir Arlan's knuckle tighten again. The same tiny opening and closing, as if a cord tugged in his mind that made his hand answer. When the greetings had been made and the courtesies eaten and drunk, and the king had bellowed for the crypts, as if what he sought there had been waiting there all its long stone sleep, just to have him wake it, John slipped away. He found the old knight, where he knew he would be, by the edge of the yard, watching like a man who lines his sight up with the wheels, spoke, and waits for the moment to set his weight. Sir Arlan had changed nothing about himself for the king's coming. He had not polished what did not need polish. "You saw him," John said. "I did," Sir Arlan said. "The king," John said. "Yes," Sir Arlan said. John waited. The old knight did not offer more. John understood the lesson within the silence. Do not go seeking a man's heart on the day he has to pack it in armor. He stood beside him and watched the yard's long shadow creep an inch closer toward the arch. That night, the great hall was a roaring animal, lit from within by honey-fat candles that dripped like snowmelt, and roaring with 1,000 small pack sounds. John took his place where bastards took their place, not starved, not celebrated. He ate well. He laughed where it did not hurt him to laugh. He felt eyes cross his face and fall away. Ghost lay under his bench and slept with his muzzle on Joan's boot. Sir Arlen did not come into the hall. He did not need to tell John that he would be where swords were not, when a hall was full and sloppy with laughter. John drank the advice by not seeking the night. Later, early, he would find him, and there would be a quiet, and in that quiet, the day would tell its truths. The king went down into the crypts with Ned, as if the old dead were his to summon. John did not go. Caitlin watched him across the hall with a look that was not anger. Not quite, not for this night. He held her gaze and lowered his. There were wars, a boy did not need to fight. He slept lightly, as was the habit Sir Arlen had taught him. To fall to sleep quickly and earn the sleep he received, and to know how to gather himself from it without dragging 100 dreams mud after him. In the morning he rose, and before the castle had chosen its day costume, he went to the Godswood, where breath can find its proper speed. Sir Arlen waited, as he had promised by never promising. The circle had thawed and frozen again in the night, so that the ground beneath was slick and treacherous. "Good," he said when Joan's boot slipped a fraction as he took his place. "Today, you will learn your feet again." They began with White Horizon. The old knight made John move more slowly than seemed reasonable. Each inch of the blade asked a question, and expected an answer composed with thought. John felt every scar in the wood. He listened to the sound of Ghost's paws moving somewhere beyond the trees and used it to pace his own steps. The world tightened around the circle, made a room with no walls that nevertheless held them. After a time, as the sky began to brighten into actual day, the old knight spoke the form John had not yet been given. "Breaking the line," he said, as if bringing a boat to shore at last. "Not because a king has come, not because it is time, because you have discovered moments on your own which have prepared your eyes for what this is." Joan's breath caught, and then found itself again. He set his feet. The knight moved toward him, not with speed yet, but with a directness that had not been there before. The blade came like a question with a single possible answer. John felt the world make a path for him, and without thinking, he stepped into the one place where the man before him had not intended to exist. His blade did not strike. It arrived, which is a different thing. He found the old knight's guard gently and turned it just enough to show its hinge and not its handle. "Good," Sir Arlen said softly, not because John had won anything, but because John had not chased anything. Again, they moved through breaking the line until the sky paled toward wheat, and the morning was a table on which someone had set a single bowl, empty, waiting to be filled. "Understand this," Arlen said as they ended. "This form requires you to accept that you might be wrong. It is a promise you make to your sight. If you are wrong, you will be punished for it. Make the promise anyway, and make it without hesitation, because the world despises a half-made promise." "Wendish." John nodded. He felt a tremor in his hands. Not fear, exactly. Not excitement. Something older. He wanted to ask 100 questions about kings and the men who wear their swords. He wanted to ask nothing at all. He bowed to the weirwood because that was his habit, and left with a count of his steps, never slipping. In the days that followed, the castle became a map covered by many hands. The king hunted. The queen wrote letters no one read, and yet everyone did. The golden boy shone. The dwarf drank, and looked, and listened, and his coin went in odd directions. The white knight from the city's guard let his sternness be his mask, and turned it where he liked. John watched them all with a swordsman's eye. He learned that the king's laugh could change shape 3 times in an hour. He learned that Cersei Lannister's smile could show warmth without heat. He learned that Joffrey did not like the sight of Ghost, and that Ghost did not concern himself with boys who wanted to be kings of rooms. He learned that the little man watched him exactly twice, and then did not look again, which told John more than if the man had stared. The old knight kept to the edges, a line drawn reason sharp, to keep the past from touching the present too often. Once, on a morning when mist hung low like a thought that will not quite form, a man from the south in a white cloak walked into the Godswood and stood looking at the weirwood as if it were a thing he had been told about, and had never believed would be real. Sir Arlen did not stop moving his blade. Jon did not stop practicing the small guard that looks foolish until it proves the hinge on which a fight turns. The man in white said nothing. After a time, he went away. Sir Arlan's knuckle said what the rest of him did not. Jon pretended to see nothing, because seeing everything is a Stark's curse and a bastard's necessity. When the king asked Lord Stark to ride south and wear a title the South believes matters, the castle held its breath again, and then let it out like a sigh that had been building since before any of them were born. Ned accepted, as a man accepts a blade he knows will demand a debt. Catelyn stood with her hands open and empty at her sides, which told Jon more of her heart than any words would have done. Robb stiffened his back and straightened his mouth and squared his shoulders, because that is what eldest sons do before the words feel real in their bones. Arya made a face and then caught herself and tried to make the face vanish in Duty's mirror. Sansa blossomed joy, and it was perhaps genuine, and perhaps made of the stories she had been taught to wrap around herself like a cloak. Bran wanted to climb the world and see if kings look different from the top of a tower. Theon smirked so as not to show the place in his belly where a hole lives. Jon did not know what he would do. Sir Arlen did not tell him. They practiced, and the ground had begun to grow grass again, at the rim of the circle, breaking the line once more. Swallowing night. Open the gate. The forms became simple in the way only hard things do when the body has decided to accept them as its own. Jon found himself thinking less in words, more in angles, weights, the story of a room's pressure. He found that even without a blade in his hand, he stood as if all places were possible until the moment he chose one. He found that in the hall, when men joked, his silence had weight in it that did not ask for attention, but did not allow itself to be ignored. He discovered that humility is not a mask that hides pride, but a habit that prevents rot. One night, Sir Arlen came late to their place and sat rather than stood. He did not apologize for not teaching. He did not need to. Jon sat too. The moon laid a pale knife on the pool. I have asked myself a question every day for many years, the old knight said, each word placed deliberately in the air. I have asked whether I am a man good enough to teach you something more than how not to die. In the South, good men tell themselves fine stories about honor and golden dawn. In the North, stones do not care what story you tell if your foot comes down wrong. Jon said nothing. He had learned this part well. I have my answer, Sir Arlen said. It is not mine to share. But the manner of it is this. I will train you to live in the space where men think only of killing. I will train you to see more choices than other men do when blood is near your teeth. If you must be a swordsman, and you must, or why would the world have made you so? Then be the kind that makes of a blade, not an ending, but a beginning. Do you hear me? Then Sadi. I hear, Jon said. That's not the same as agreeing. I agree, Jon said, and the words were not said lightly or quickly, because they would be with him long after the man who asked for them was gone. Then listen once more, Sir Arlen said, turning his head toward the weirwood, as if asking permission from some older thing than both of them. There will come a day when the world will ask you to break not merely a man's line, but a line drawn across the hearts of those you love. You will be tempted to be clever. Be clear instead. Cleverness is a way to hide. Clarity is a way to stand. They sat until the moon moved enough to shift the shape of the light on water. The morning the southern party departed, the yard smelled of toiled leather, and the particular sadness that lives at the back of horses' eyes when they are made to carry men away from what they love. Ned Stark embraced his children and his wife, and then Jon, last. In that embrace, something moved in Ned's face that no one else could have seen, because no one else looked at him with Jon's hunger for the exact grain of a moment. I had thought to take you with me to the wall, Ned said softly into Jon's hair. Nothing like a lord then, and exactly a father. Painful in its suddenness. But the world is mad with visitors, and the hour is not what I thought it would be when I first made that plan. Men are not their own makers. Will you forgive me if this road must wait? I will, Jon lied. He lied with love, and knew it, and felt the small cut it made in him. Ned's hand tightened. You owe me nothing, he said, which was not true, but he believed it when he could bear to. There is more I would say, I will say it when the world allows us a quiet. Remember that I told you that much at least. Then it was horses, and trumpets and banners and stones, that remembered every departure as if it were the first, and made the same hollow noise in answer. John stood on the wall and watched them go, until they were only a line, and then only dust. Ghost stood beside him and did not pretend to care for human pageant. He yawned, showing the clean knives of his teeth. Sir Arlen came and stood at Joan's other side. They did not speak. The day went on without asking their permission, which is the only way days know how to go. The South went south with its smells and its politics, and its ways of using words to change the shapes of rooms. Winterfell became itself again in their wake. It is the nature of some places to be themselves, most truly, when no eyes measure them. In the quiet, things grow. Training changed. Without the king's men watching, Sir Arlen let slip a hint more of what lay beneath Dawn's style. He spoke of the space just beyond reach where fear lives, and how to visit it without setting up a tent. He set Jon to practicing with his left hand until the left hand no longer felt like a guest at the table. He placed pebbles on the ground and told Jon to move among them without grinding any into the dirt. He put a candle on the hilt of a sword stuck upright in the earth, and had Jon cut without making the flame bow. He had Jon cut and put the flame out in a whisper where it barely existed. He did not clap when Jon learned that. He nodded once. "Do not mistake trick for truth," he said. "A man who can do what you did will be tempted to do it to be admired. Admiration is the cheapest wine. It will leave you with a headache and no wisdom." At night, Ghost would wake and growl sometimes, not at anything Jon could see. Jon would rise and put his hand in the thick fur at the wolf's neck and feel the tremor there. He learned to trust the tremor even when it did not show him the cause. He learned that men in the night are only half true, and that steel has a sound at 3 in the morning that it does not have at 3 in the afternoon. The last lesson of that spring came in the form of a stranger. He wore the wrong sort of boots for this far north, and carried a sword that had seen more salt than snow. He asked for a name at the gate, and gave one that was likely false. He paid for a bed and spent his coin as if it were someone else. Ghost did not like him. Sir Arlen knew his kind without needing to see his coin at all. "Today," the old knight said in the God's Wood, voice without temperature, "you will meet a blade that hates you without knowing you. You will neither return its hatred nor be foolish enough to imagine you can turn it into a friend. You will be clear. Do you remember how?" "How?" Jon breathed. "I do." The stranger found them as if by accident. He entered the God's Wood with conviction in his step that said he had done this many times in many places, and had not yet paid for it. Sir Arlen looked at him with the expression men reserve for small storms. The man smiled, and his smile made Jon think of a chipped tooth with rot beneath it. "I have heard there is a swordsman here," the stranger said. He looked Jon up and down. "I see a boy. I see a man who wants to be famous in a place that does not care for the names of men," Sir Arlen said. The stranger's hand found the hilt of his sword the way a drunk finds a bench. Too quickly, with relief. "Will you fight for a coin, old one? Or for a story?" "I will not fight at all," Sir Arlen said. "But he might." He nodded toward Jon. The stranger blinked, then laughed. He spat in the leaves. "And if I break him, will the old one fetch me a prize from the Lord's table?" "If you break him," Sir Arlen said, "you will have broken a boy. Does that satisfy you?" "Then?" Something ugly moved in the stranger's face. "It satisfies me enough." Jon stepped forward. He did not feel rage. He felt, to his surprise and his quiet shame, a thin thread of pity for a man who had come to Winterfell and decided to leave himself behind in the only way he knew. He drew his practice steel, rather than the new good blade Sir Roderick had told him he had earned. The stranger's sword had the nicked sound of iron that had once been kept well, and had since been forced to live on bad oil. They faced each other inside the same circle Jon had drawn at dawn after dawn. It had collected 1,000 breaths. It had collected Jon's first missteps and his first mastery. It held them now like quiet witnesses. The stranger came in as men come who have won the sort of fights that are loud. Jon did not let the sound instruct him. He did not let the swagger instruct him either. He listened only to the pressure of the man's weight on his boots, and the way the shoulders tightened at the hint of a feint. He gave him white horizon because it is a form that allows for love or for violence depending on what the world asks. The stranger took the invitation not as a gift but as an insult. He came hard. John let him. He let him enough to let the man tell his entire story at once, so that John might see it whole and not as broken pieces. When the moment arrived, it was gentler than John had imagined. The line presented itself, not as a challenge, but as a fact. John stepped into it. His blade was an answer with no malice. He turned the stranger's sword aside, and in the turn he showed him the empty place where his guard should have been. He set the point to the man's throat, a whisper. The stranger stopped, because his neck understood clarity if his pride did not. John took his point away at once. "You can keep your coin," he said. And he meant it not as kindness, but as a refusal to make a story out of a man who was already a story told badly. He stepped back. He lowered his blade. He did not smile. The stranger swallowed, and in that swallow lived a lifetime of being pushed, and not yielding because yielding had never been an option where he came from. He spat again, then turned and went out the way he had come. He would tell the tale his way in the next town. Winterfell did not keep that either. Sir Arlen nodded once. "Clarity," he said. John nodded back. That night, John stood at the wall with Ghost, looking north where the sky keeps its secrets, and south where men busy themselves carving each other into small pieces of story. He thought of Ned Stark somewhere on a long road, with a king who had once been a boy. He thought of the old knight who had taught him to hold a blade, and not let it own him. He thought of a promise who had not yet shown him its shape. He thought of a sword made of star, and of whether stars care for men at all. He lifted his hand and set it gently on Ghost's neck, and felt the living pulse there, and decided that some things do not need the sky's permission. Morning would come. The circle would be waiting. A boy would enter it. A man would also enter it. They would move, and the frost would break, and the dew would climb the waster's grain and become a sheen that caught the first light. The forms had names, but the movement had more. He could feel them inside his body now, like tides. White horizon, calling the comet, swallowing night, open the gate, breaking the line. There would be others when he was ready to find them. Sir Arlen would say nothing, and in saying nothing would say the most important thing a teacher can say. "I will not save you from the moment you must meet alone." The north slept. The wolves hunted. Steel learned the shape of hands. Winter was not yet at the door, but it had written its letter and sealed it and sent it on the back of some slow, patient weather. Jon Snow kept his breath low and steady, and when at last he slept, it was as a man sleeps who has chosen his promise and is not afraid to wake into it. In the weeks afterward, he found that the training had entered the places that were not training. He could feel a wrongness in a room before he knew the shape of it, a sign of boots where none should be, a cup not placed where it would have been if the hand had belonged to a careful man. He learned how to turn his head a fraction so that men only wished to ease his neck, when in truth, he was giving his left ear the sound it needed. He learned to listen to the kettle and know when it would boil by the space its sound left in the air. He felt the change in Ghost's breathing when he dreamed, and could tell if the dream was chase or battle, or simply the warm chase that is a field under sun and a lazy sky. Once, he came upon Catelyn Stark in a narrow corridor with the light behind her, so that her hair had a halo not unlike the one the weirwoods sometimes wore in fog. She did not move aside. He did, making his body small without shrinking himself. She watched him, measuring. For a moment, her mouth softened as if a thing of great weight had risen toward it and might be spoken. Then it sank again, and the old careful stone lowered itself back into place between them. "You move differently," she said, and it was not an accusation. "I have been taught," Jon said, and he put no boast in it. "That I can see," she said, and went on. And the corridor filled in behind her with the small echoes of her steps. He wondered later what shape their story might have had if either of them had been born different, or the world less itself. He let the wondering be what it was and did not try to shape it. Not every thought needs a blade. Summer reached its fullest green and then, being summer, began to decay, though sweetly. John practiced in heat enough that the sweat made a grin of salt across his lip and made his shirt stick to his spine and his fingers more honest about their grip. Sir Arlan bore the heat as men bear debts. He did not forgive it, but neither did he let it alter him. Sometimes he would shed his cloak, and the scars on his forearms would show. Thin white tongues of old burns, a small crescent at the bony place near the wrist, the straight, unlovely seam of a cut that had nearly cost him the hand. John looked and did not ask. He had learned that questions can be the sort of blade that makes a man reach for armor when the better course would be to keep his skin in the air. When they spoke of swords, Sir Arlan became a kind of poet that no court would recognize. "Do not overpraise steel," he said, which was itself a sort of praise. "It is only a tool. But do not forget to thank it with your care. Men have died because they thought themselves above their tools. Men have also died because they loved their tools more than they loved the lives those tools were meant to serve." "Dayne," Dawn, John said, and the words still felt like a confession, "is a blade," Sir Arlan said. "A rare one, a beautiful one. Not to be sung at a dinner table by men who have never eaten what hunger feels like. But a blade. The hand matters. The eye matters. The promise matters more." "Your promise," John said before he could stop himself. Sir Arlan's mouth compressed for a breath. "There are promises," he said at last, "and there are promises you put on like a shirt and cannot take off even when you sleep. I would not have you wear one such. I would have you choose. The thing I teach you best, if I teach you anything, is to recognize the hour in which choosing is demanded." "Will I know that hour?" John said. He meant now. He meant in the months coming. He meant when a man's name is asked of him, and he cannot give the one the world knows, and must give the one he knows himself. "You will," Sir Arlan said quietly, "because you will have trained your sight on small things until the large cannot surprise you. That is all a swordsman does, Jon Snow. He builds a life of paying attention. The rest is technique, and technique is only the habit that protects attention when fear knocks it sideways." They stood then, and the blade moved, and the form that has no name, the one that is only breath, held them and let them go and held them again. The frost would come, as it always did. Men would write their names and erase them, and write them again. The circle would wait in the gods wood, and accept the first foot to step upon it as if it had been made for that foot alone. John traced the rim with his eyes and felt that it matched the rim of a horizon in him. He was not yet what he would be. He was not yet the realm's finest anything. He was a boy standing at morning with a man who had given him the means to see the day for what it was, and not what he wished or feared. He breathed, and Ghost breathed, and the leaves of the weirwood turned their pale faces to the empty sky and did not ask it questions. "Oh, Kay." The day-brand fell. The morning began as all patient mornings begin, with work disguised as quiet. John rose before the first kitchen girl had roused the coals. He walked the old stone in bare feet to remind his souls what they lived upon. Ghost went ahead, pale as unlit bone, tail moving with the deliberation of a pendulum. The sky over the eastern wall had not yet decided what color to be. The air tasted of damp wool and iron. Sir Arlan waited where he always did when he meant to be found. Just beyond the first bend in the godswood path, where birch and pine trade shadows, standing as if he had been carved there with a knife that loved the wood. He had already drawn the circle, and it glistened with a thin skin where night had breathed on it. They worked. White horizon, until the shoulder stopped complaining. Calling the comet until John felt the weight shift in his toes without looking down to confirm they were there. The light came in degrees. The weirwood let them be, as it usually did, watching with those red leaves that never seemed to blow quite the way other leaves did. Swallowing night. Sir Arlan said. When the mist at the pool had thinned, and the ravens were practicing their harsh vowels. Slowly. The more slowly you begin, the less weight you will have to carry when the hour demands speed. John gave himself to the slowness. He let the forms curve, gather him like a wave that lifts a body without asking who it is. The blade moved as if through a thicker air. He felt his own breath as something small with a tail that he could choose to step on or not. The old knight stepped into him then. Not with force, just with presence. And the moment asked John to decide without being obvious about it. He did not cut. He took the smallest step to the side and let the man pass through where he had been. "Good," said Sir Arlen. To be unseen when one is in front of a man is a rarer gift than to be invisible when at his back. Arya appeared as she often did, out of a stitch in the morning's seam, hair escaping anything that tried to keep it. She watched the last movements and drew near with the attitude she wore to protect a new bruise. Stubbornness that wished did not need itself. "You said I could learn how not to fall," she blurted. "Not to climb as much, that isn't what I said. How not to fall. You're supposed to be in the hall," John said. "I was," she said, with truth in it. And mischief buttered on top. "Now I'm here." Sir Arlen did not smile. The slightest shift at the edge of his mouth could have been mistaken for cold. "Stand," he said, indicating a flat, moss-dark stone near the pool's edge. "Feet the width of your hips. Knees soft. The world is full of pushes. Do not plant so hard that you break at the first one." Arya stood. He pushed her, gently, with 2 fingers. She swayed, then found the sway's end and returned. Ghost lifted his great head and blinked, attentive to nothing and everything. "Again," said Sir Arlen, "with your eyes closed." "I'll fall," she said. "You may," he said, as if the weather had asked for permission, and he had given it. Not falling has nothing to do with never finding the ground. She shut her eyes, set her face as if about to refuse a cup she must drink anyway, and stood. He pushed. She tipped and corrected, and tipped again. The sound of water against stone counted for her where sight could not. John watched the muscles of her legs learning their letters. "When you climb," Sir Arlen said, and he kept his voice flat and general, as if addressing no one in particular and everyone. "Do not climb the part of the wall that wishes to be climbed. Find where the stones resent you the least. It is not always the same place. Your hands must be eyes. Your feet must be honest." "Then shall." Arya opened one eye and squinted at him. "You've climbed our walls?" "I have done many things I no longer do, because I have paid for them once, and do not wish to pay twice." Bran sprinted across the yard later like a boy who had never heard of breaking, eyes full of a high blue that belongs to a sky too big to be believed. He had a bit of string in his hand, and a plan that needed nothing more than that string to be magnificent. John saw him and felt that mixture of tenderness and exasperation only younger brothers inspire. "He ate something before you become a kite," he said, catching Bran's sleeve as he went by. "I'll eat when I can't climb," Bran said, laughing, and wriggled free. "I want to see over the world." "You'll see it better if you don't meet it head first," John said. But Bran was already half turned away, his body a question mark, his face alight. Arya, from the kitchen steps, made a face of envy so pure it could have been put in a glass case and labeled. Sir Roderick cleared his throat at a boy for dropping a shield with more noise than purpose. The smith's hammer said its piece about the day. A sparrow hopped near a puddle as if the puddle mattered more than castles. The fall came after noon. John did not see the instant, but he felt it. Something in the castle's breath stopped, and then the yard was a bowl someone had tipped, and everything ran into it. Shouts gathered and broke and gathered again. A woman screamed the small, sharp scream a hen makes when a hawk shows its shape in the sky. The world went bright around the edges as if a lens had been fitted to it. John ran. Ghost ran beside him, not a step ahead, not a step behind. The corridor swallowed feet and returned them as echoes. John shouldered through bodies without counting whose. By the time he reached the base of the broken tower, the scene had become a knot too tight to untangle by watching. Men looking up and then away, as if the height hurt their eyes. Theon with his mouth open and hands at his belt doing nothing because there was nothing for hands to do. Rob white around the lips but set, always set, with a determination that had never yet met anything it could not at least look at. They had already carried the boy out. He lay on a door used as a litter. Small again, all at once amidst all that wood and arm. Caitlin walked beside as if walking were an insult. Her face was a mask that had been fitted poorly and would not stay on straight. Ned was gone south, and the absence went up and down the corridor as audible as a man's weeping can be. John did not try to step in. He went one pace back and kept his body where it could be useful, if that utility appeared, and did not insist on announcing itself if it did not. Ghost stood, set, and made a sound that was not a growl, and not a growl, an acknowledgement that this day had teeth. They carried Bran into the bedchamber with the window that looked over the courtyard, where the weather makes its favorite show. The room filled. Maester, mother, brothers, someone with clean cloth who had come only because his hands were free and he wanted them to be used. John could not see the boy. He could see the ripple of bed linen, the twitch of old chain, the careful cruelty of hope trying to sit where it did not belong. Sir Arlan appeared at Joan's shoulder and did nothing except stand. His presence trimmed the air. "Breathe," he said, so low John thought he might have imagined it. "The body sets traps when the heart is frightened. Do not walk into them." "I should," John began. "You should stand," Sir Arlan said. So John stood. He did not pray, exactly. He did not have that line in him clear enough to follow. He did what he knew how to do. He put his attention where his body was and kept it there, and he watched. He watched the maester's hands move through herbs and bandage as if setting a table for a guest who might not be hungry. He watched Caitlin's mouth learn a shape it had not held even in her unkindest hours, a mouth that had forgotten the practice of words. He watched Rob become older in the ways boys become older, not in the face, not at first, but in the way the neck holds the head. It is the neck that gives the first answer to grief. He went when there was no use in staying, and the room had begun to spit out those who were not strictly necessary. In the yard he found the world, insultingly, still ordinary. A pot boiling somewhere, 2 dogs quarreling about a bone that would be lost to both of them when a horse came down the way, the distant music of a lute someone had tuned poorly, and was now coaxing into sufficiency. Caitlin barred him from the chamber the following day. It was neither the first nor the worst time she had denied him a door, but this one had teeth that bit deeper. He took the bite. He did not try to answer it with an argument. He stood outside the door until late, because standing had been his craft from boyhood. Ghost lay with his chin on John's boot and watched the linen drift at the edge of the rush door where the wind tested its manners. Tyrion Lannister found him there, his face the face of a man who has slept when he ought and drunk when he ought and been clever when he must, and, for once, had no immediate use for it. He approached as men approach a forge, knowing the heat can be good if handled properly. "You look like a guard," Tyrion said. "It's an honest profession. The pay is poor, the respect worse, but the view is often interesting." John looked at him, and his look was not the look of a boy in need of a kind word, though he would not refuse one. "I am where I belong." "That is rarer than you think," Tyrion said. He looked at the door as if it were a stage curtain he had seen drawn aside 1,000 times. "They don't let you in." "But they have let me in. Though I am stranger in Southron both. The world has never been fair. Fortunately, it is often funny." "Is it?" John said with more curiosity than mockery. "Oh yes." Tyrion leaned on his cane as if on an old friend. "I came to offer cleverness, and it turned out they needed quiet instead." "How humiliating." His tone put no acid on the word. "I like your wolf. He tolerates those who see him rather than look at him." "Then he and I may become great friends," Tyrion said. "Do you know, Snow, I'm fond of bastards and broken things. Neither of us chose our shape. We can choose our actions. That comforted me once in a brothel, and will likely comfort me again in a book. Remember it when the world tries to convince you that your name is the cage it keeps you in." Bah! John met the small man's eyes. I will. Excellent. I have dispensed my wisdom for the morning. If you see me sober later, give me wine. If you see me drunk, give me more. He bowed with the ease of a man who has found a way to bow without ever seeming lower than anyone. And if you walk the wall, do not piss off it. Everyone does it once and laments their decision immediately. John almost laughed then, and the almost was a better medicine than an actual grin would have been. Tyrion left, whistling 2 notes, and then deciding against finishing the tune. That night John went to the Godswood because he could not find his sleep in any bed. Ghost went where John's feet went, his eyes red coins in the low light. The leaves were dark, the pool a black plate on which the moon had declined the invitation to sit. Sir Arlen was there, perhaps listening to the weirwood breathe, perhaps listening to the absence in himself. He is not dead, the old knight said, and it was the simplest sort of truth. No. That means the story still has the decency not to tell us its end at the beginning. The wind woke and ran its fingers along the stones. Do you remember the cup on the hilt of the sword? Sir Arlen asked softly. How you learned to move without bending the flame. I do. That is how you will live these days. A throat is not the only place a blade can press. Hold your neck steady anyway. Endure the weight and learn where to put your feet so that you can when you must. Bento. Must what? Name the line. Said the old knight, and there was a stubborn grief in it that John recognized at last, not as anger, but as loyalty owed to something that could not ask for it any longer. Caitlin emerged from the room after 3 days of keeping to it, like a soul keeps to a promise. She went to the Godswood, and whether for the old gods or for their silence, John did not know. She saw him by the bridge, and stopped as if seeing a wolf she had not expected at a water she had thought hers alone. Her face had that terrible gentleness grief carves, when it has worked a woman so hard, she has nothing left to waste on the instruments of politeness. Go, she said. Leave me, my son. John dipped his head. Enough to say I heard you. Not enough to say I am made less by the hearing. He turned away. Ghost stood last, and slid his gaze over her with an evaluation that was not human. He kept walking when he felt John walk. John went to Bran's door at dusk to say goodbye without being allowed inside. Robb stood there, hair uncombed, mouth set, as if that determined mouth could keep breath in a boy's chest. John's throat ached at the sight of him. They stood together for a dozen breaths, and exchanged nothing except the knowledge that both were standing because the other was. You'll go with Benjen, Robb said finally. His voice had learned something of iron. When he goes, John said. I had thought to go sooner. Plans earn their correction. I should have gone with Father South, Robb said, and beneath it, I should have stayed. I was made to hold walls and swing iron. You were made to be Robb, John said. That too, Robb admitted, with a bitter curve of the mouth that John liked better than any comfort could have produced. Gods keep you, brother. And you. They embraced, and in the clench of arms some part of everything they could not say turned into heat where their chests met. When they let go, both were older, and the night had come on without either of them having noticed the exact moment. John found Sir Arlen by the armory with a small roll of leather in his hands. He handed it to John without ceremony. It was the weight of oil and cloth, and a second leather pocket held a whetstone smoothed by years of patience. Tools, he said, not gifts. A whetstone is a habit in your hand. Use it. Oil your blade whether you have cut meat or air. Do not let it punish you for your laziness. The blade is a vessel you fill with your care. Thank you, John said, and did not mistake the simplicity for a lack of heart. Sir Arlen nodded, as if John had agreed to a thing that had always been required of him. You will go north and find more teachers than you expect. Do not think you have outgrown learning because you can stand in a circle without being ashamed. The cold teaches. Hunger teaches. Men who hate you and men who love you teach. Listen. Wah. And if you must fight, do not fight to win the praise of men who would write your name on a cup and forget it in the next wine. Dawo. John waited. There was a shape in the air. He did not name it, and he did not look away. "I owe you more than I can give," the old knight said after a long silence. "What I can give, I have given. The rest will show its own face when it is ready." "Damn? Will I see you when I return?" John asked, reckless for once, letting the boy in him speak the parting's longing. Sir Arlen looked at the stones as if the stones had asked him a question they kept asking. "If I can," he said, "but I do not write all the hours of my own day." They clasped forearms. Small as that seemed for all that had passed between them, the old knight's skin was cool and unflinching. John wanted to ask him one more time about dawn and its tale, and whether a star cares what happens to the place where it lands. He did not. He went and prepared as men prepare when the road is large, and they are small on it. Benjen moved with the ease of a man who liked the road more than the chair, and liked the wall more than the room. He had a smile that did not go far enough to be used against him. On the morning they left, he stood beside his horse and looked at John and looked at Ghost and looked at the horizon and made his calculation and found it pleasing. "Ride by sense, not haste," Benjen said. "I'll have no heroics on these miles. You'll have time enough to be brave when stupidity has had its fill first." Now, I understand," John said, meaning it. The yard gave up a small crowd, Rob, red-eyed and straight-backed, Theon, jangling with the need to make something of every exit, Bran's empty window, Arya, pretending not to be there and entirely there. Sansa was somewhere being told to set her face and practice the art of not letting the world know it had impressed her. Caitlin did not appear. That, too, was a form of appearing. Tyrion was ready and made a show of resenting anyone who thought to help him onto his mule. He scratched Ghost's ear in passing. "Remember my advice," he said. "About the edge." "I will," John said. "And if the world offers you a crown," Tyrion added in the quiet tone he used when the jest pretended not to be a jest, "weigh it in the hand before you place it on the head. It is not always the right size. Some heads are not meant for hats." They rode. Winterfell sank behind them with the dignity of a thing that knows it will be there when they return, or when their children do, or when their bones do, and it does not change itself for the departures of men. The King's Road ran like a vein through the body of the land, full of traffic and quiet both. The air changed as miles went under hoof, the smell altering by increments too small to name. Peat giving way to pine, pine to damp brook, brook to the thin acidic breath of old leaves, turned into new soil. Benjen set a steady pace. They did not push the horses as if the destination would present itself any sooner, because a man had reminded his horse that he was impatient. They made camp with the competence of men who had slept out more often than under a keeper's roof. Tyrion unfolded comfort out of bags with the practiced hands of a man who considered comfort his greatest ally in any campaign, and there is a kind of wisdom in that. At night, when the others slept, or pretended to, John walked with Ghost to the road's edge and found a place to move slow steel through chill air. He did not drill to be seen. He drilled because the body that had learned to be steady asked to be kept honest. He did not think of Sir Arlen as he cut. The man was in his wrists and shoulders, the small of his back. The way his left foot remembered it must not be a guest. He practiced breaking the line with trees until he felt ridiculous, and then practiced it again until the ridiculousness fell away and only the line remained. Benjen watched once from the dark. He did it well, the way men of the Night's Watch do most things well when they do them at all. In the morning he said nothing except, "Keep your wrist soft in the second phase," which told John everything he needed to know about Benjen's eyes and what they kept for themselves. On the third day, a thin rain fell and kept falling without anger. Tyrion provided a cloak the right size for a boy and said nothing about whose it had been. They passed a peddler who had made his cart into a sanctum and would not emerge for anything less than the promise of coin. They passed a party of 4 men with 1 horse among them, who had once been soldiers and now were hungry in a way that did not yet shame them. They nodded, and John nodded, and Ghost's presence turned the men's shoulders a fraction so their backs were never fully presented. Tyrion talked when the weather permitted and shut his mouth when the wind discouraged conversation. He had stories of men and mistakes and women and words, and seemed to take a perverse joy in telling them in such a way that the hero and the fool often traded places midway through with no fanfare. "People will tell you their plans if you listen as if you did not hear them," he said one night, by a fire that would not be drawn into showiness and insisted on being mostly heat and little light. "I have been taught to listen," Jon said, and the small man looked at him with something like approval and something like sorrow yoked to it. "And yet," Tyrion said, "you will be a man in a black cloak living among men who mistook a color for an absolution. Keep your eyes." They reached the wall under a sky that had made up its mind to be iron and stayed that way. Men speak of the wall and forget to mention its taste at the back of the throat. It is not made of just ice. It is made of the belief that kept men lifting water and stone into a height no hand should aspire to. It is made of prayers and fear, and the habit of work so relentless, it became a kind of faith. Jon drew his horse up when it came into sight and sat. He felt the pressure in his chest shift. Ghost's ears went forward, and then flattened, and then forward again, as if deciding how to feel about a cliff that had grown up where the sky should have gone. "Big," Tyrion said. "That is my contribution. You may embroider it at your leisure." Benjen's mouth twitched. "It is a wall," he said, and it carried an affection that would have been absurd in any other mouth. "It will not admire you if you admire it. Go on." Castle Black huddled like a secret that forgot to be told. The smell was smoke and tallow and men. No city elegance had ever rubbed itself onto these stones. The rough is its badge. Benjen made the introductions that mattered. Donal Noye took one look at Jon's hands and his shoulders and his eyes, and gave him work, because that is what Donal Noye did. "You'll carry wood, and you'll carry water, and you'll carry your pride until it learns to sit where I tell it." "Yes," Jon said. Ser Eliezer Thorne assembled recruits with the relish of a man who believed his doom required an audience. He made a shape with his mouth when he saw Ghost that promised attention to that matter when boredom had done its rounds. He glanced over Jon as if measuring him for cloth he would never afford. He called him Lord Snow, and made the word Lord taste of rotten fat. Jon knew a test when he met one. He placed his attention on his feet. Training began as training begins in all places where men decide to pretend they can make iron of flesh. It was at once crude and exact. Jon's blade was truer and quicker than boys who had never had their hands corrected by a man who counted angles as a merchant counts coin. He could have made fools of them. He could have made a name for himself in 3 mornings that would have earned him nothing but envy and small vengeances. He did not. He found each man's small truth and used it to make of them someone he could stand beside without shame. When one rushed, he met him with the patience that says there is no hurry where blood is concerned. When another feared, he gave him a target he could meet, and then made the target smaller by a thumb's breadth and praised truly when the cut improved. The yard smelled of sweat and iron. Ghost slept in the shade and opened one eye for the moments that mattered. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Gren asked between breaths that cut his chest into pieces. "In a small circle," Jon said. "In a place full of trees." "Trees don't hit back," Pip muttered, shaking sweat out of his eyes and smiling a smile with more teeth than satisfaction. "They don't," Jon said. "But they do not forgive you for not paying attention. That can be worse." Ser Eliezer watched with loathing that had to work around grudging acknowledgement. "Lord Snow thinks himself a little dancing master," he sneered. "We'll see if the boy can dance when winter puts knives in the wind." "I've been cold," Jon said one day, when the man's bitterness wrapped around his ankles like water, and tried to pull him. He made it neither answer nor challenge. "Not like this you haven't," Eliezer said. "We'll speak again when your piss freezes in your cock." "We will," Jon agreed, and got on with the work that would make that conversation uninteresting when it came. At night, when the yard gave up its last heat, and the bowls had been put away, and the men left to snore and curse, and pretend to dream something other than what they would, Jon took Ghost near the base of the wall, and stood where the shadow is thickest. He drew his steel, not a great sword, not named, not famous, a good blade made by Mikken's reasonable hands, and worked the forms until the cold found its way between leather and skin, and made a second skin of its own. He learned the way breaking the line felt when the air was dense and unwilling. He learned the way swallowing night altered when the breath clouded the sight. He learned the particular charity of the cold. It gave nothing, and thus did not take insult when nothing was offered back. He met men in black whose faces had been worn by winds and words he did not yet know how to use. Bowen Marsh, whose caution had its place and took as much room as it could. Jour Mormont, whose presence made the hall at once smaller and more honest. Aemon, whose voice was a lantern that did not blind your night vision. The old man asked him nothing at first. He asked him later, and when he did, it was the sort of question that cannot be answered with pride. Who are you when no one knows the shape of your face? Aemon asked, looking slightly over John's left shoulder as if the boy might be taller than his shadow. John said, which was both everything and insufficient. John who tries to keep his breath where it belongs. That will do, Aemon said gently, until it does not. Tyrion took his leave and went his way south with a promise to send books he did not owe. Do not let them make you smaller than you are, he said. Do not let them make you larger either. Be your size, Snow, and see where that takes you. It takes me to the top of the wall, John said. And they went up together one last time to look at a world that had long ago decided to be mostly ice. Tyrion hummed the 3 notes of his unfinished tune, and laughed at his own joke about pissing, and did not piss, and went below. Benjen watched, and in his watching lived a line. The uncle went ranging after, with men who knew how to step where the snow keeps secrets. He looked at John before he left. The look said, "You have learned enough not to die of your first mistake." It said, "That does not mean you will not make a second." It said, "I will come back." And because Benjen was who he was, the statement felt as sure as any oath he had spoken. Ghost watched him go and sniffed the air, the way a man tastes a wine he cannot afford. The days lengthened or shortened, depending on whether you measured them by light or labor. John taught himself by teaching others. He did not show off. He stole nothing from their hands except the sloppiness that would have cut them. He gave them back their own competence with their own names on it. When Sam came to them, soft, afraid, full of a gentleness that would have been crushed under a less careful boot, John put himself between that gentleness and the man paid to sneer at it. He found a use for Sam's mind that had nothing to do with steel, and in doing so learned it again that the blade is the wrong tool for most rooms a man must enter. At night he dreamed sometimes of Winterfell's pool, and sometimes of a white river in a place with stone pale as bone and a keep that kept its shadows cool. He dreamed of a sword that sang a sound he could not reproduce, a high clean note like frost drawn across glass. He dreamed of a woman laughing like a bell, hung in a high place, and felt a grief that was not his. He woke with Ghost's breath at his neck and learned the habit of letting the dream be a dream and not turning it into a day's order. A raven came late in a gray afternoon when the wall hid its edges in its own weather. It had a letter that smelled faintly of sand and old paper. It belonged to no lord he knew, and every lord who had ever decided that secrecy should look like stupidity. John brought it to the Lord Commander, because that is what one does when one is not yet tempted to keep secrets from the men who must live with their consequences. Jour Mormont slit it with the care of a man who has been bitten by a letter before. He read it without moving his face, and then looked at John with new eyes, not warmer, not colder, simply more aware of the shape in the air that the boy carried with him. "You know a man who is not here," Jour said. "I know many," John said. "This one asks that I keep an eye on you without letting you feel the eye," Jour said dryly. "He offers me nothing I do not already possess, which is my judgment. He is a Southron. He speaks like a man who has spent a decade aging with moderate success. I do not think he is used to asking for anything." Memshar. John thought of Sir Arlen's hand at the bark of the weirwood, and of the way his thumb opened and shut when certain white cloaks passed his sight. He kept his face empty. "If he asks you to watch me, he does it because he has watched me and knows I need it. A man who knows the use of a watch does not love a wall less for having not built it," Jour said. "I have no patience for southern games, but I recognize a swordsman's eye. Trained out. You were training before you had a name for it. Do not stop in my hall." "Nemtuns." "I won't," Jon said, and Jor nodded as if ticking a box on a list that had to be maintained if the wall were to continue being itself. Elieser's disdain did not lessen, because some men are made comfortable by their own dislikes, and would rather keep them than admit a change in taste. He set Jon to prove himself in dirty ways to men who would otherwise have hated him for clean victories. Jon obliged. He let them strike him where it would teach them something. He took bruises in places that did not show under black, and gave a certain kind of boy the gift of not failing in public. The yard sound changed. It learned to applaud improvement instead of spectacle. That is no small miracle in a place where men have little else to own. News traveled the way the cold does, not in straight lines, and it always arrives even when you wish it forgotten. They heard of a hand being severed, and a city with a smell of blood and spice. They heard of whispers carrying a king like ants carry a fallen fruit. They heard and threw the hearing on the fire for warmth, and then felt guilty for it, and listened again, because men are made of story even when they are starving for meat. In the small hours when all noise except the wall's own had been consumed, Jon took Mikken's blade, and by firelight or no light at all, moved through forms with their plant names, and their sky names, and the name that has no name. He found that breaking the line is not always about a sword. Sometimes it is about a word placed with a man who is halfway to a choice he will regret. Sometimes it is about stepping between a joke and its target with your body and letting it break on you instead. Sometimes it is choosing to say nothing when everything in you wants to show a man he is wrong, because being right will cost you more friends than being useful will cost you sleep. Once, on the wall with the wind clawing at faces like a cat that had not eaten enough, Jon looked east and saw a pale suggestion of something moving far on the ice that might have been wind and might have been not wind. Ghosts' hackles rose in a way that did not belong to wolves in the ordinary course of their ordinary wildness. A rangy ranger beside Jon, Kekja Whitelock, or some other man who had learned to count his fingers after frost, squinted and spat and said nothing, which was its own kind of alarm. Jon said nothing either. He set the sight into the ledger he kept, in the page where he stored the entries marked, "You will need this later, and wish you had written it better." He wrote to Robb in an ink that froze if you set it down too long and told him nothing of swords and everything of skies. He wrote to Arya on a scrap and told her that the trick to not falling is listening with your feet and not letting anyone tell you where your edges are. He did not write to Catelyn, because there are letters that never leave the heart and cannot find a table to sit at without breaking it. He wrote to Sir Arlan by never writing, because the old knight had taught him that words were not always the place where a lesson lives, and some messages find their target by being carried in a wrist rather than in a raven's leg. Summer would come, and then leave, and then come again, if the world kept to its habits. In the space between, men would make mistakes and correct them, and sometimes not. Jon learned to feel time as something other than a line. It was a circle like the one in the Godswood, scuffed by feet, cleaned by rain, shimmering with frost, waiting to be stepped into again. One evening, after Alistair had sneered a sneer he had grown fond of, and a boy had nearly drowned in it, Jon found himself walking alone near the old storage sheds, where the wind likes to tell its oldest jokes. A shadow separated from shadow, and became a man whose hair had gone to winter, and whose hand remembered music. He moved like a man who did not wish to be counted, and Jon counted him anyway. "We have not met," the man said, voice low as old wine. "We have," Jon said, because he recognized the not move of the thing. It was in a room made of trees. The man's mouth did the thing the old knight's mouth did when the past stepped on his foot. "You carry his manner," he said. "He asked me to ask you a question, and not to be offended if you answered it better than I would have." "Ask." "What do you do when the line will not break?" the man asked softly. "When the man before you is 10 lines at once, and you cannot name any of them without the others bending your blade." Jon thought of the night the catspaw had not come because he had already left. He thought of Catelyn's mouth learning a shape it could not keep. He thought of Benjen's back disappearing into the trees, of Tyrion's unfinished tune, of Jorah Mormont's laconisms, of Aliser's dislike, of Aemon's gentle inquiry. He thought of Arya standing on the stone trying not to fall. He thought of Sir Arlen's thumb opening and shutting when white cloaks passed beneath the godswood. He thought of a sword made of a star, and whether it mattered that it had been a star at all, when the hand that held it had left. "You step out of the circle," John said. "You change the room. You call the man to follow you into a place where his 10 lines mean less. Or you refuse the fight. Or you lose. Losing is a choice too. Sometimes you lose and make of that loss a door for someone behind you." Mennerwani. The man nodded in the slow way of men who are cataloging their own mistakes without inviting witnesses. That is an answer he would have given. That is an answer he did give, once Dottle. He looked at John without looking at him. "He is proud of you in a manner that does not make pride into a crown. That is rarer than any steel." "Is he well?" John asked, and there was no boy in the question except Mur. As men are when they have decided to be. The man said. "The South tugs at its knife strings. The North pretends not to notice. The world hunts everyone, and some men refuse to be hunted in a straight line. Keep your guard. Keep your kindness. Both will be used against you. Keep them anyway." He went back into shadow the way a bird folds itself into a hedge and is gone, though you know you saw it go. The first time John killed a man for real, it was so quick it felt like a mistake. 2 rangers had not returned with Benjen, and then men went to find them and returned with silence in their hands. One night a group came out of the trees, the way shadows learn to walk. They were not alive in any way John had been taught to respect. They were not dead in any way a man knows how to mourn. Afterward, when the heat and the blood had been ripped away by the cold so hard, it felt like being flayed by weather. John sat and looked at his blade and waited for it to say something it could not. Ghost lay with his chest heaving like a bellows. The headless thing lay with its fingers, still trying to remember a habit they had loved too much to give up. Jor put a hand on John's shoulder. "This is a wall," he said as if repeating a prayer. "We build it and keep building it. We do not ask it to sing." John cleaned his blade with oil that smelled faintly of pepper, and put it away, and did not congratulate himself or try to be noble. He went to the yard the next day, and corrected a boy's wrist, and prevented a bruise, and said nothing of a night that had shown him that some lines break a man's heart, even when his blade does the right thing. Letters came like birds who are not sure they like the seed you offer. News tasted of tin. Kings played the games kings play, and knives made themselves important. The South called, and it would keep calling, and one day John knew the voice would grow loud enough to be heard, even through the wall's proud deafness. Sir Arlen's form stayed with him and changed when they needed to. He found a new one, and did not name it because it did not ask for a name. A way of stepping forward when a friend is making himself into an enemy without hating him for it. He practiced it on cold mornings and thought of Rob. He practiced it on dark nights and thought of himself. He did not carry Dawn. He did not want to. He carried a blade that belonged to no legend, and made of it a sentence he spoke carefully each time he drew it. He did not call himself the realm's anything. He called himself John, and then let his breath go out, and come back, and did it again. Every now and then when the wind came right, and there was too much silence to bear, he thought he heard a high, clean note a long way off, as if the morning were being scraped by a careful hand. He did not chase it. He stood where he was. Sometimes that is what a swordsman does when the gods have gone to ground. He stands, he keeps his promise, he does not break unless he chooses when and how. On a day when the snow had pulled a quilt over the world, and the cold had taught even the most talkative to keep their words inside their teeth, Sam came to John with a book that smelled of leather and salt and thyme. "There's a story here," he said, embarrassed at his own desire to share it. "Of a sword made when the sky fell, used by a knight who was made harsh by praise and gentle by love." John took the book and did not open it. "Tell me instead," he said. Sam did, halting and eager, getting names right where it mattered and wrong where it did not. When he finished, John breathed for a moment and gave the story back to the air. "Do you believe the sky cares?" Sam asked shyly. "About who raises a blade that used to be a piece of it?" "I think the sky is satisfied to be the sky," John said. I think what matters is the hand and the promise it made." Sam nodded, relieved to have been offered an answer that let him keep both wonder and doubt. He went away, and Ghost nosed Joan's hand. And outside the wall, the wind stepped between trees like a dancer who had forgotten her steps and not cared. When sleep came that night, it brought a dream of Winterfell's godswood, clean as a first breath. Sir Arlen stood in the circle. He had the waster in his hand, the worn grain shining with oil Jon had rubbed into it with cloth and care. He did not speak. He lifted the blade in the slow, deliberate way that begins a lesson and never ends one. Jon stepped into the circle, and though the dream had gifted him with a door beyond the yard, where men clean fish and sharpen knives, it had not attempted to make the world easier. The circle was the same. The breath was the same. The man was the same. Jon smiled, though he did not remember later whether he had done so in his sleep. And he raised his own blade. "White horizon," the dream said. "White horizon," Jon agreed. They moved until morning, and when he woke, there was frost at the kettle's rim and an ache in his shoulder that suggested a dream can make labor of a boy without asking his leave. He went to the yard and used the ache instead of pretending it wasn't there. It was part of the truth and belonged with the rest. The ravens learned his name by taste and scolded him when he was too near the rookery, because he was a man, and men make cages of their own. The men learned his face by the way its eyes watched without needing to weigh anyone down. When men fought him in the yard and lost, most of them left feeling less humiliated than surprised to discover that losing can feel like learning when a man refuses to turn it into a meal for his pride. That is a kind of swordsmanship not often praised, and the more useful for it. Word came of Benjen, and then of not Benjen, and the hole that leaves in any room filled with men who liked him, and depended on his habit of being where he said he would be. Jon did not make a show of grief. He put it in his neck and carried his head as a man does who cannot afford to lower it too often. He went to the top of the wall and looked at the world where his uncle had gone, and could not decide if it looked more patient or less. When the call came for him to ride with men who would see beyond the trees and return if allowed, he made ready without ceremony. He oiled his blade. He counted his breaths. He touched Ghost's skull and let the wolf leave his scent on his wrist. He stood in the yard and waited for someone to bless him. No one did, because this was the night's watch and blessing is a southern art. He blessed himself by remembering the circle. He remembered the names, opened the gate, calling the comet, swallowing night, Dayne, breaking the line, the nameless step that changes the room, the love of attention, the refusal to be clever when clarity is asked for. He remembered the old knight's eyes, the color of cloud shadows on a river. He remembered a hand on a bark. He remembered a voice saying he was a good boy and might be a better man than deserved, and he decided to be that man whether anyone deserved him or not. The wall watched them go. The snow wrote and erased their tracks, as if a god had set itself to learning their handwriting and given up in frustration. Ghost moved without hurry. Jon kept his seat without forcing the horse to carry him harder than necessary. The world did not care to know them. That is the world's right. Men who require witness in order to behave well are not to be trusted with a sword. They entered trees that had been looking at men for longer than men had been able to name them. Jon felt the quiet that lives in a forest where hunger has put its feet up. He felt the potential for violence as a kind of pressure in the air, like weather that had not yet decided what it meant by the word storm. He breathed. He kept his awareness in front and to the sides and back and above. The habit of a man whose teacher had insisted that rooms are spheres and danger rarely announces from the obvious direction. Ghost's ears turned. Jon's head did not. He kept his mouth slightly open so he could taste the cold and hear it at once. They found tracks. They found things that had once been tracks and had then been smoothed by hands that were not human hands. They found a bird that had been cut as if by a blade used with indifference and precision both. They found a ring of stones that was too neat to be the work of happenstance and too ugly to be the work of hospitality. They did not find his uncle. Jon did not expect to. Hope is a tool. It dulls if you beat it against hard objects too often. On the third day, they found a man who had been one of theirs. He had eyes only because someone had left him eyes. Ghost stood and did not make a sound. John stood and did not apologize to the air. He did what he had to do, which was ugly and merciful and quick. He cleaned his blade and did not clean his heart, because no oil yet discovered does that work. At night, by a thin fire that would have given more heat if it had not been born into so much cold, a man with old scars on his cheek asked John where he had learned to move, as if he were in relation with everything around him, instead of merely alone with a blade. "In a god's wood," John said. "Which god?" the man asked faintly. "The one who listens," John said. He slept and did not dream. He woke and did, in the way of men who sleep too little and ask too much of the hour. In the dream, Arlan said nothing, because there are times when a teacher's silence rescues boys from trying to make sense where only endurance is asked. John moved through the form that is not a form, and then he stopped, and there was a line that would not break, and he remembered his own words to a man whose name he did not know at a shed with jokes in the wind. He stepped out of the circle. He changed the room. In the morning, he did the same without steel, and prevented a fight between men who wanted to spend their fear on something they could stab. He named a line that needed no blade. "We are together. We will be together until we are not. We will make that hour later, not sooner." When he thought of Winterfell, it was not with yearning as boys think. It was with the steadiness of a man who knows where his feet began. He thought of a sister on a stone with her eyes shut. He thought of a brother with his mouth set and becoming. He thought of a father on a road that could not keep him safe, because roads are only roads and not fates. He thought of a mother who could not bless him and the gift that had given him, the necessity to bless himself. He thought of a man who was not a father and had been more than one in all the ways that mattered. He did not ask the world to make him the finest at anything. He asked it to keep giving him mornings. He breathed them when they came. He stood in circles where men could see him, and in circles where they could not. And in both he made the blade an instrument, not just of ending, but of naming. He did not look for dawn. He learned to hear it sometimes in the place where steel meets air, and the sound is most honest. And when Ghost pressed his head into Joan's palm, he felt the living heat of an animal that had never asked a question and never needed an answer. And he thought that perhaps the sky did not care, and perhaps it did. And either way, the blade needed oiling, and the men needed teaching, and the wall needed watching, and the forms needed moving through. And he rose and did the next necessary thing.